These are African rhythms, passed down to us through ancient spirits. Feel the spirit, a unifying force. Come on, move with the spirit. Stand up, clap your hands. Groove with the rhythms, get down, get off.
Welcome to Africa World Now Project. I'm your host and producer, James Pope. Today, reflections on autonomy, direct democracy, and more with Modibo Kadalie, Part 1. Africa World Now Project is next. The idea of democracy and its attendant operative mechanism, democratic citizenship, specifically the right to belong, is often lauded as a gift of Greco-Roman sociopolitical thought and Western European and American cultural contributions to a specific conceptualization of what has come to be known in academic discourses as modernity. From this historical-cultural perspective, a concept was needed to determine what it means to be human and belong in a particular form of sociopolitical organization and economic logic. However, moving beyond rhetoric, paying critical attention to the origins of this worldview, democratic citizenship as expounded by the Athenians, the lauded form of sociopolitical organization that was intellectualized by an Athenian elite, was conceptualized to exclude others. The inclusion of others was seen as a negation of order and the rule of law. After all, was it not Aristotle who invoked the notion of jus sanguinis, meaning right of blood, or by blood, to be an exclusionary tool serving the interests of the dominant class? Moving forward through the 10th and 13th centuries with intra-European religious cultural war informing the foundational impetus for the nation-state, the stage was set for a process of alienation rooted in a racial superiority, as a hierarchical and commodified economic world order was refined in the intellectual and practical milieu of the 14th and 15th centuries. What is important to highlight here is that by the time the 14th and 15th centuries arrive, the concretization of the previous period of a limited articulation of what it means to be human becomes fully rooted in a justification for and maintenance of private property, which informs capitalist logic birthed from a protracted process of alienation as the basis for cultural religious supremacy, all firmly concretized in the legitimacy of nation states, the creation of colonial borders, exchange of value based solely on fiat currency, binary constructions of gender and race, etc. What is clear in our current historical epoch, as Modibo Kadalie aptly points out, younger people are convinced that the nation state is not offering them a future. Newer generations of researchers are now beginning to look for evidence of community and collectivity, a collectivity that lies in the very fabric of Africana forms of knowing and ways of being, fully articulated in the various forms of resistance such as those found throughout the Americas expressed as maroon communities. In defining, mapping, and attempting to find the most articulate expression of democracy, Modibo Kadalie presents an important intervention. One point of entry into his contribution is in intimate direct democracy, Fort Mose, the Great Dismal Swamp, and the human quest for freedom, which is a clear disruption in dominant discourses. Kadalie engages interdependent themes such as Black autonomy, radical public and social history, intimate direct democracy, social intimacy, Black geographies, and radical ecology, while centering a Pan-Africanism that strengthens the conceptual lens through which continuities in Africana sociopolitical thought and resistance can be further identified, explored, and contemporarily applied. Kadalie's perspective on Black autonomy, grounded in social intimacy as being the essential mechanism for a functional democratic society, is undoubtedly rooted in his own background. Kadalie grew up in Rice Barrow, a Gullah Geechee community on the Georgia coast, where he often points to Africana ways of being and forms of knowledge that were transmitted from generation to generation and deeply ingrained in his worldview throughout his early development. His work is a delinking of Africana historiography and historicity from the American narrative, and thereby a delinking from the Greco-Roman Western project to construct a particular form of democratic society. Its exploration of space geography as a foundation for liberation is a vital contribution to a range of categories of knowledge production, with the primary form of marronage as the fullest articulation then and now of Africana resistance as a catalyst for thinking about a new society. We see reverberations throughout the practices and thoughts of those categorized into a Black radical tradition, which has now reached a point of being gutted and overused by a particular class of Black neoliberal intellectuals who present as radical. But we'll set this aside for now. Modibo Kadalie argues that the problem of human survival in the face of rapid and catastrophic climate change is beyond the understanding of current, antiquated sociopolitical praxis. It cannot grasp the scope of this catastrophe, which by its very nature demands a new politics beyond the realm of exploitative global capitalist enterprise, zealously protected by the armed forces of competing empires. Since we know there is a social crisis at the basis of every ecological crisis, or that every ecological crisis is in reality a social crisis, consequently, ecological crisis can expose social crisis. Now, in the 21st century, we can confidently say that hierarchically organized societies cannot solve or even adequately address ecological crises. In fact, such societies with their nation states, empires, and capitalist markets have shown themselves to be the cause of widespread ecological destruction. If Pan-Africanism, as recent history demonstrates, is going to be defined by the unity or clustering of Black-ruled nation states, and Black capitalism, it serves no purpose other than the continued expression of Black exploited classes under Black elites. Dialectically, the concept of Pan-Africanism is perfectly compatible with the development of locally decentralized and directly democratic institutions in areas where ordinary Africana people live and work. In other words, properly organized and applied, a Pan-African social ecology can be a framework that orients our direction to realizing a new society. The vague outline of a people's Pan-Africanism began to emerge within the discussions and the clashes of concepts and ideas that were playing out within the 6th Pan-African Congress at Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. It was by no means the dominant perspective at the Congress. However, since that time, it has become clear that when most activists try to conceptualize Pan-Africanism, they typically mean it in the sense of a pure incrumist statecraft. Nevertheless, it cannot be ignored that there is great danger in the statist conceptualization, as they can take us in a backward direction. For Kadalie, Pan-Africanism can be used as a directly democratic people's framework, particularly applied to local struggle. It can be applied in the same way as the indigenous people's movement or a working class people's movement, not for the reform of the nation state or for a nationalist movement, but as a decentralized anti-state movement rooted where Black or indigenous people live and struggle. A non-exclusive movement including all local activists who are engaged in autonomous self-organization and the creation of directly democratic institutions that can respect and find camaraderie with and within all oppressed groups. To be more clear, Kadalie's direct democratic worldview is rooted in what is called a Neo-Pan-Africanist tradition, which in turn find roots in the writings of C.L.R. James, Guyana's U.C. Quayana, Jamaica's Joseph Edwards, and resonates in the work of Ella Baker and political prisoners Mumia Abu-Jamal and Lorenzo Cambone Irving. Neo-Pan-Africanism is distinguished from classical Pan-Africanism by the questions of state power and ecology, where classical Pan-Africanism assumed that freedom for African peoples could be attained through the emergence of African state power. Neo-Pan-Africanism clarifies that state power itself is inherently oppressive, ecologically destructive, and ultimately counterproductive and counterintuitive to any genuine democratic movements. For Modibo, orienting this worldview to excavate and examine the histories and contributions of Maroon communities in the Americas, paying attention to the Great Dismal Swamp and Fort Mose, where various groups of African peoples from a variety of cultural and sociopolitical traditions cooperated unitarily and democratically built communities where they defended each other from the violent logic of plantocracy, is deeply informative. Today, we will listen to autobiographically the origins of Modibo Kadalie's perspectives on direct democracy, autonomy, marronage, black anarchism, and atheism. Part 2 will engage this development in more detail. Part 3 will extract paying attention to the application of this experience and ideas, while Part 4 will provide a few thoughts on moving forward. Dr. Modibo Kadalie is a social ecologist, movement intellectual, and lifelong radical activist within the civil rights, Black Power, and Pan-Africanist movements, and the founding convener of the Autonomous Research Institute for Direct Democracy and Social Ecology. He is author of Pan-African Social Ecology, Speeches, Conversations, and Essays, Internationalism, Pan-Africanism, and the Struggle of Social Classes, Intimate Democracy, Fort Mose, The Great Dismal Swamp, and The Human Quest for Freedom, and a number of other articles. During the 1960s, early and middle 1970s, Modibo Kadalie was an active member of a number of radical formations. In the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, he served as a member of the Central Staff and chair of the People's Action Committee in Highland Park, Michigan. In the International African Liberation Support Committee, Kadalie was a founding member of the National Steering Committee. He chaired the Detroit Local Committee in 1972 and 1973, and then continued as a member of the expanded International Steering Committee as a representative from Atlanta, 1973 to 1975. Within the 6th Pan-African Congress, he chaired the Southern Regional Organizing Committee from 1974 to 1975, and was also a member of both the North American Delegation and the North American Left Revolutionary Pan-African Caucus. Our show was produced today in solidarity with the Native, Indigenous, African, and Afro-descendant communities at Standing Rock, Venezuela, Corbreeson Jackson in Jackson, Mississippi, Brazil, the Avalon Village in Detroit, Colombia, Kenya, Palestine, South Africa, Ghana, Haiti, and other places who are fighting for the protection of our land for the benefit of all peoples. Listen intently, think critically, act accordingly. Enjoy the program. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. And the intellectual breadth of your work is very important, particularly in this time. Not that it wasn't important before. Sometimes ideas don't catch on until the moment allows them to kind of come to fruition. Let's jump right into a conversation. Thank you, Brother Modibo, for taking the time to just join in the conversation. The intention is for it to be useful for those who engage it, to kind of follow a historical genealogy. And the platform is yours. I'm just going to be sitting in the car with you, you driving. I'm on the passenger side. I'll be prompting certain questions. So let's go ahead and get started. Again, thank you for joining us today. So let's go to the autobiographical sketch.
Okay,
Let's start there, and then we'll move.
It's always challenging to figure out when did you become conscious and deliberate, and it's always, I always look at the sit-ins in 1960, March of 1960 in Atlanta. But in reflection, I'm thinking it must be earlier than that, because the sit-ins jumped off in 1959, 1960 is when the sit-in jumps off. I'm not sure I understood what that was all about. Because where I come from, Black people voted. There was some segregation in the county seat, but I grew up in a Black community, and these people were doing democratically, deciding what they were doing and where they were going to go. And they had the Emancipation Proclamation parade back in the woods, all kind of things that was residual. But I think that the time when I really got to understand this direct democracy stuff is when I was on the swimming team in 1962. I had come up from Riceboro when I was 16, and I could swim, but I wasn't. I had no competitive swimming experience. I taught myself how to swim. When I realized that I was really didn't like authoritarianism at all, is when in 1962, the fall of 1962, I had been swimming for a while. How I got into swimming was I wanted to play football, and I'm so glad I didn't get into that. Because I was I was 152, 153 pounds when I went to Morehouse. And I was going to go out for the football team. We had just started a football team down here. And I was going to be the quarterback, but we never, I came to Morehouse before that took place. So I had visions in my head that I was going to go out for, backup quarterback at Morehouse and stuff. So I went down to the locker room at the gym and I got my stuff and was going to put my stuff on and go out on the field. But I saw them guys in the locker room, high school football, different from college football, even at the lowest. And man, I saw some guys weighing about 300 pounds and they were freshmen. They said the real team hadn't even come back yet. so I made a decision that maybe I shouldn't do that. So I put my gear back into the supply place, and the guy laughed at me and said, "Oh, you're not going out?" I said, "I don't think I'm going to do this." So that same night, it was a Wednesday. They had recreational swimming at Morehouse. I went down to the swimming pool just to enjoy myself, splash around a little bit, because I enjoyed swimming in creeks and ditches and stuff. So this guy called me over and said, "Son, swim right over there for me." Old, big, tall guy. I later found out that was Dr. Haynes. I swam across. I did my best imitation of Tarzan. Swam across the pool and swam back. He said, "Look." The guy told me, he said, "Look, we got a swim team in Morehouse." I said, "You got a swim team? Well, what do y'all do?" he said, "We swim." I said, "Well, he said, "Would you meet me down here Monday at 1:00 and we'll see if you can help us out." So he was there. Wasn't nobody in there but me and him. And he put me through a few routines and stuff. And it was hard, man. It was really hard. I was hard, sore, and everything. So at the end of that week, he said, "Now, if you want to join the swim team, we practice at 4:00 Monday." By that time, I was disenchanted. I said, "Oh, okay." I was going to go home. I wasn't going to see him no more because he was putting me through some torture, man. So I came down there. I was going back and forth about the decision. So I came down there at 4:00, and these guys were swimming. They were really swimming, man. And he said, I asked him, I said, "Man, you think I can help you out?" He said, "Yeah, you're going to be able to help us out." And so he had a little thing, a little clipboard, and a little training schedule. And I made the team. And I found out it was a championship team. And we were SIAC champions because I didn't do much the first year. But I realized that if you work hard and progress, you'll make it. In the second year, the second year I was on the relay team, man. We were swimming up a storm. And then I reflected on where I was when I caught the train in Savannah trying to go to Morehouse that previous year. I'd gone miles. From September to the SIAC swim meet in February, man, I was a different guy. And I look in the mirror, kind of like the ugly duckling, you know what I mean? All my hormones had kicked in, and I said, "What happened up here?" I used to be asthmatic. I was no more asthmatic. And so I got a job as a lifeguard that summer. I worked real hard. And the next year, man, I was the third guy on the championship relay team. But the point I'm getting at is this Coach Haynes, he would get us together and he would say things like, "All right, we swim in Tuskegee today. I've done the research and this is what it looks like to me." But he said, "I'm not going to get wet. What do y'all think?" And then we raised our hand and said, "Well, we'll if so-and-so would move over here, I think we can score over here." And I think scoring. He said, "All right, we'll do that." Okay, now this same guy here was the coach my freshman year and my sophomore year. With the junior year, he went to Africa and he was coaching some Nigerian team over there. And an authoritarian guy who didn't know swimming became the coach. He hadn't done no research. He didn't know who was who or what was what. And I remember this particular instance, we were swimming Tennessee State. Wilma Rudolph was in the place. And we were looking bad, man. I had been working hard that summer. This is the second summer. I worked real hard. And the Tennessee State guy could beat me. I knew he could beat me. But I wanted to be close to him because he was the baddest and the baddest black butterfly guy in the country. And I swam with him, and I stayed with him almost all the way. Then I realized that I could actually rewrite some records. You know what I mean? Because I'd worked real hard, and I could go into the record book. So these guys, it was a coach and an assistant coach. They were up to no good. They had the turning point was this guy had ordered the relay team, and it's almost like he was working for Tennessee State. we had 4 guys on the relay team, and it was a short course pool, so each 100 yards was 5 laps. So he split it up. One on two, first and third was on one end, and the second and fourth was on the other end. So he's organized us in exactly the wrong way. Let me tell you who these guys were. One guy was from Detroit named Carl Holsey. He was an emotional guy, and he was very inconsistent. But if he was in the middle of a race, he gets very excited, and he put forth his best effort because he feeds off of the momentum of the crowd. Then there was another guy named Clayton Cross. Clayton Cross would swim his 57, 58. That's the minute he swam, no matter where he was placed. Then there was another guy. He was from Albany, Georgia. Then there was Bob Harris. Bob Harris could swim. He was good. But if he was behind, he wasn't going to catch nobody. I mean, these guys, that's what their psychological makeup. He wasn't going to catch nobody, but if he was ahead, wasn't nobody going to catch him. Then it was me. I was an emotional guy too. But if you brought me a lead, or it brought me a piece of a lead, or even I was kind of like a little bit behind, I would put out something. So the guy had it arranged all wrong. He had Carl Holsey swimming the first lap. He didn't belong in the first leg. He didn't belong there. Clayton Cross needed to belong there. And anyway, I asked the coach, I said, well, shouldn't Clayton Cross be swimming the first leg? He said, no, I'm the coach. You're the swimmer. You do what I say. You know what I mean? We got in the huddle, and I just said, man, look, we're losing this, and it's looking bad for us. Plus, Wilma Rudolph is in the stand. I'm not going out like this. So, by the way, I was captain of the team by then. So I said, Cross, you swim the first leg. Cross is right on, man. Well, he didn't say right on. He said, hey, I'm ready to go. Jose, you swim the second leg. Because I figured Jose would, if Cross was with the guy, it would become more emotional for him. And I was swimming the third leg. And I figured I could give Bob Harris something to work with. And he was the anchor. See, coach had me as the anchor. Well, anyway, you know about it. You an athletic guy?
Yeah, I play basketball, so yeah, I'm very familiar. Yeah,
you know how that coaches.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. One of the things one of the things we would always say in basketball, you got to know your personnel. Like you got to know who can shoot, who you can give the ball to as they're running down the court. Everybody has their particular And
you probably been with some authoritarian coaches too. Anyway. Clayton, it turned out just like I thought it was going to turn out. Clayton Cross stayed with the guy. Jose opened it up. Jose, he exploded, man. He really won the race for us, really. And so all I had to do was hold on a little bit. And so I was able to hold on and get a little bit more. And then Bob Harris was kind of excited because he didn't want the boys to think they caught him and run him down. And we won. So Wilma Rudolph came over to me after it was over. I'll never forget this. Wilma said, I see what happened there. She said, I knew y'all could swim. Y'all just needed a coach who understood who you were. And of course, this was an Olympian talking to us. And so she gave us tickets to go downtown to see the basketball game. Tennessee State were playing the University of Hawaii. It was a big deal then. This was 1962, December 1960. It was a big deal because you had the all-black school there playing an integrated school in Nashville. So she gave us the tickets to the game and stuff. So I asked the coach. The coach was upset because I had contrabanded his orders. Well, to make a long story short, it spiraled out of control, and I was assaulted by the coach. I was taken off the team, and I had to drive. We had to go back to Morehouse. I didn't say a word. And then, the next day at swimming team practice, I went down and cleaned out my locker. And all them guys, I didn't say nothing to them. All them guys cleaned out their locker and came up to my room and said, "Coop, what we gonna do now?" I said, "I don't know what y'all gonna do, blah, blah." Well, we can't swim. We can't swim like that. See, what happened is they had understood the direct democratic thing, which I later understood. And then they took it upon themselves to exact a certain amount of justice. And I was the last. My swim career was over. So I never did go back, but I did. I finished in 3.5 years, so they didn't kick me out of the school or nothing. That's when I understood the direct democracy stuff. It wasn't really taught to me or taught to anybody. And I talk to my teammates now about that. Some of them understood it. Some of them say, "Well, we should have done what the coach said." You know, that was the 1 year after the sit-in. And I'm thinking that was a greater turning point than the sit-ins actually were.
No, that's a very interesting, and I'm glad you opened it with this narrative because, again, the idea that we can often identify the specific or the specificity of the point when we become politically conscious, as you mentioned, is really kind of hard to do because a lot of times it's ingrained in who we are. If you could go back just a little bit and talk about being a swimmer, swimming in creeks, coming from the community that you came from, because you mentioned it, but talk a little bit more about your community that you came from, that you were raised in. Yeah.
Well, the community was called Crossroads, but the little white merchant group of people, which the Jim Crow laws kind of helped develop, they lived in a little town around the sawmill. The sawmill was the economic center of the community. And Riceboro is where the post office was and where the white merchants were, had the little grocery store. There was no big grocery stores or anything then. But black people had little shops in the periphery where they sold, candy and soft drinks and some supplies that black people need. But the principal grocery stores were owned by the people who owned the sawmill. One turning point event took place. I was in high school. My brother, who was 2 years older than me, he was in high school too. But he had a paper route. And my brother was older than me, and he went to the sawmill one day to collect, for his paper route. I was at home. He rode up, and he had been assaulted. I mean, his nose was bleeding, and his face was it was a mess. And so he was so angry, I couldn't get him to talk. So my father was down in the field. My father was the principal of the school, and he had to have some kind of diplomacy with the white people in the town. And they had to have some diplomacy with him too, really. I went down the field and told him what happened. My father came up to him and said, what happened? What happened? So he tried to tell him that this white guy beat him up, knocked him off the porch and all. And I said, "What were you doing?" He said, "I was just trying to collect." So what my father did, and I was in the car and observing all of this, my brother had gone into the closet and got my father's gun. And he was on his bicycle going back to town, and he was going to find this guy and kill him. That was his idea. We were able to intervene and got him to cool down and get in the back of the car. My father took the gun from him, told us, "My gun, what are you doing with my gun?" So I'm observing all of this stuff. So my father go to the store where the owner of the sawmill was. He owned the store too. His name was C.B. Jones. He was also a descendant. He was also a descendant of the rice aristocracy. His great grandfather had owned some plantations too. So he, it was a continuation of what would have been happening in the country all the time. So my father went in there, asked to see C.B. Jones. C.B. Jones came out there and said, my father, there's another little maneuver too that I don't know if you know about this, but the black men never wanted to be called boy or by their first name. So they didn't tell these white people what their first name was. They gave them their first initials. That's why, so by calling him C.B. Jones, he didn't have to call him Mr. Jones. By him calling E.B. Cooper, he didn't have to call him Evans. So that was an equalizing kind of thing going on culturally there. And all these little subtle things was registering in this community as to who I was. My father also was one of the founders of the NACP. But people already had the right to vote. So it wasn't like the contradiction wasn't as sharp in this coastal community as it was upstate where he came from and where my mother came from. My mother came from Jefferson County, which is up there where they did cotton. We didn't do no cotton. There was no cotton down here. I never seen no damn cotton until I went up central Georgia. But anyway, so my brother, me, I'm just, looking around, and I guess I must have been about 12 years old, 11, 12 years old. C.B. Jones came out and said, you see, I still call him C.B. Jones. That's who he was to me. He wasn't no Mr. Jones, C.B. Jones. And he came out and said, Professor E.B., what's going on? He said, well, we have my father was diplomatic. He said, we have a little misunderstanding here. My boy was assaulted by one of the guys who worked for you, and he was out there trying to get his money to be collected, and he had done that before at this place. What had happened was there were some white guys from up near Jessup had come down, and they were related to CB, but they didn't understand what was going on in this community. This community is different from what they had up there. So what had happened was, this is the best I got from the story, my brother went up there and said he wanted to talk to C.B. Jones. And then so one of the guys who was visiting, he said, you don't mean C.B. Jones, you mean Mr. Jones, don't you? And my brother said, I don't call my daddy Mr. Daddy. Oh, that set them guys off. That set them. Oh, man. And that's when he got assaulted. So when C.B. Jones got the hang of that and got the message, he called the guys out. He said, you need to apologize to this boy. And the guy said, I ain't gonna apologize to no nigga boy. And so my father said, well, maybe if it's all right, he was negotiating. He said, all right, well, can you apologize to the professor? He was a man about 35, 40 years old. He was a man. He wasn't no boy. And he said, I apologize to this nigga here, but I ain't gonna apologize to this little nigga's son. And C.B. Jones said, no. Who's working for who here? And he made him apologize to my father. Now he didn't allow him to apologize to my brother, but he made him apologize. And he asked my father. He says, "Is that all right with you?" And my father said, "Well, I guess that'll do." And then he grabbed my brother, and we went left. And he gave my brother, said, "Man, you gotta be careful with these crap around here." Yeah. But that was the kind of town we lived in.
No, that's really fascinating because, this is obviously, you're talking about a social context that kind of scales up, right?
Yeah,
you talked about being, downstate and then upstate and how the different social relations become important. But again, I hope folk are gleaning from what you're saying. You're coming from a particular area of Georgia. You're coming from,
Yeah, it is.
you know,
It is.
an area where there's a sense of resistance and dignity.
Yeah, it comes from these people down here with Geechees, and they're descendants of the Maroons that I write about. That's who they are, you know. That's who I was, but I wasn't born down. I was born in Savannah because that's where the hospital was. But my father and mother came down here from Savannah State as teachers, and they raised their family down here. So me, my sister, and my brother, we Geechees too. So when we went upstate, we talked a little different. It's not a wholly developed language, but it's a vernacular, you know. And people used to tease us. We teased them because they talk funny to us. We talk funny to them. But the voting thing, the black people down here voted the whole time. I don't even remember not voting. Now they couldn't run for office, but they could vote. Yeah. That's what made CB sensitive, because CB ran for sheriff and he wanted to support some of the black people.
So there was these instances, and there's many instances where there's this negotiation process of like there's a pushing against the social order, but then there's also an attempt to kind of maintain that order. So there's those contradictions are kind of flaring.
Where did you grow up?
Well, I grew up in.
By the way, this is the early 1950s in rural coastal Georgia.
Oh yeah. You know, I came years later, but I wasn't even thought about it until like. But yeah, you know, so between Philadelphia, so it was very interesting because between Philadelphia, I was able to play basketball. I grew up in a time where you couldn't go to certain places unless you actually were, you had passes, you would say. I played basketball, so I was able to kind of move around to different parts of the city. And then I moved down to Richmond, Virginia. So having those stark social experiences become very important, you know, for me. And then, of course, I played basketball, and then I went back to Philadelphia, and then I went to D.C. So I've been, you know, in this kind of like, I guess, mid-Atlantic area for, you know, a particular long time, but also traveling. I've been around the world multiple times, and my family was a transient family as well. You know, we lived, you know, in multiple places throughout the places we kind of lived. But
let me bring this up too, because in 1952 I had a kind of a transformative experience. My mother and father were educators. My mother was a librarian, and my father, you know, principal. They enrolled in a summer program at Columbia University, I think in 1951 or 52. So they took the whole family up there. So my brother and I stayed with my father's sister, who lived in the Bronx, on Rogers Place, right off Westchester, near the Intervale subway station. But it was, you know, it's elevated then. It wasn't in the ground. And I mean, when you get up to the Bronx, you know, it's elevated. It's not doesn't go underground till you go downtown a little bit. The Intervale station is the next station on the forgot the name of the line, Dye Avenue, and it goes up. The next station down was Prospect Avenue, still in the Bronx, and it went downtown. My brother and I went to New York, and so we played baseball too. We played baseball with a rubber ball that we took an axe and cut it in half so it would do stuff, you know. So these guys play with a smaller ball. These Italian guys play with a smaller ball like this, but it would do similar things. So we could hit it and we could run. So we was in on the streets, you know what I mean? And so then I realized that all these people, they were white guys. I mean, they were Italian, but they were white guys. And they ate different food, you know what I mean? At first, I had a pizza in one of these guys' houses, apartments. And I thought it was a pie. They invited me, you want some pizza pie? Yeah, I thought it was a sweet potato pie, man. You know, I mean, that was the limited thing. And they had different people speaking Spanish, people speaking Italian, people speaking English, they getting along. Then they had the big market up the street where some of the Italian immigrants had, you know, had their ethnic foods and stuff there. And that experience was transformative because when I got back, I went into Riceboro, and my little sister, she was about 7, 8 years old. She made the mistake of drinking some of the white water. And so one of the ladies who was the wife of the store owner, Hodges, she said, "Don't drink there. That's for white people. We don't believe in no race mixing around here." So I said, "Well, in New York, based on everybody up there." She said, "Well, that's New York. That's them damn Yankees up there. They don't know what." So, but I understood that. I began to see the difference between the South and the North. And of course, my father made sure that we stopped in Washington, D.C., saw the Lincoln Memorial, went up in the Washington Monument, went by the Supreme Court and all that kind of stuff. And we stayed in Philadelphia. We stayed in Daddy Grace's hotel. I think it's still standing now. What they call it now?
I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big, tall hotel.
Yeah.
And then we went on up to the Bronx, and we went into Yankee Stadium, and I knew the Yankees because that's the team that I wanted the Brooklyn Dodgers to beat up on. And, Brooklyn Dodgers almost had a complete black team by 1952. Yeah. I can still name the guys.
This is very fascinating because I'm also, and I definitely don't mean to speed up, because what I'm really interested in how these lived experiences are filtered through as you're developing your intellectual practice and your organization practice. These things become very important because they're leading they're leading you to.
And there's another little thing that's important. My father was a reader, and he subscribed to the Chicago Defender, the Pittsburgh Courier, the Baltimore African American, the Amsterdam News, the weekly edition, of course, the Jet and the Ebony. And then when Emmett Till got killed, I remember the morning, man, when he read about it, he kicked a hole in the wall, man. He said, "Them crackers ain't gonna do right." And he was cussing and going on. He was enraged. My mother had to come in there and settle him down. But he was very aware. And by the way, he was a World War II veteran, even though he didn't go to Europe or to the Pacific, primarily because they wanted him to stay at Fort Benning and teach the incoming black sharecroppers' sons to read. So he was teaching them. So he never did get to go because he was an educated Negro who could teach. And he was he had the rank of a sergeant. And he said things. He said, this stuff stuck with me. He said when they would have German prisoners of war coming to Fort Benning, if the German soldier was an officer, they required the black, I don't know if it was the white, they required all of the soldiers, black and white, to salute the German officers. And he didn't appreciate that. And the first officer he had, black officer he saw in downtown Columbus. And of course, he saluted him. He was a sergeant, non-commissioned. This guy was a first or second lieutenant.
And this is the German soldier?
No. This is downtown, and there was a white soldier walked by him and did not salute him.
I got you.
And what he did, he's a soldier, whoever the black officer was, and he put took his jacket off and put it on the parking meter, put his hat on top of the parking meter, said, "Now you salute that." He said, "You're not saluting me, you're saluting the uniform." That's an incident. My father was very animated when he talks, and I listened to him, and he has a lot to say, really. But that was the South. And then we go back and forth to Savannah. Savannah was the closest town. It was 26 miles away, and we did most of our real shopping in Savannah.
We talk about, this dichotomy between, North and South, and I don't want folk to, what we're talking about is a particular order that looks different, but has the same particular objectives, whether it's North, South, Midwest, and things like that. But this is important, looking at the South and also this particular order and how it even spreads to South Africa, to apartheid. We can make many of those connections. So as you're moving, as you're developing, and, you're kind of reflecting on, your development and your communities and, these different instances. And there's many more that I'm sure was able to, but these are important. So as you're developing and as you're, you go to college, go to Morehouse, you're in swim team, that situation happens. You're very clear at a very early age, a very influential part of your age is direct democracy.
Young guy,
authoritarianism, and you mentioned coaches, man. Yes, absolutely, coaches.
you see it still today. I saw it yesterday.
Yeah. And I was like you. I was one of those ones. I will push, and once you kind of got on my bad side, you were on my bad side, like But
let me tell you something else too. They were norming these standardized tests in the public schools, both white and black. My father was privy to the scores when they came out. In Liberty County here, this is Liberty County school system. He knew that certain individual black kids were scoring higher than the white kids on these normative tests. And he told me the reason I know that is because he said, look, you scored the highest test. You scored the highest on the SAT in the whole county. You don't need to be down here no more. This is going to stifle you. Plus that, I was getting an age where I was playing a horn. I was a musician too. I like to play my horn. Then we playing these little juke joints around. And my father knew that I was going to get some little girl pregnant, and that was going to be it. So that's how I got into Morehouse. Really, so I took the test. He took a day off of work to drive me to Savannah, to Beach High School, where I took the test. So I went in there. It seemed like the test was about 3-4 hours or so. I did my best, and so I asked him. I said, "Well, I didn't get them all right because it's too much." He said, "Would you do your best?" I said, "Yeah, I did my best." So that's all we can. And then he bought me dinner and brought me home. And then he said, "If you did your best, you're gonna hear from them soon." And 4 weeks later, I got my letter. He knew. I don't know. He called somebody or something. I think that the process that Morehouse had a little quota system. Mm-hmm. They would fill from the big cities in the South, like Macon and Savannah and Columbia, South Carolina, and Birmingham and all that, Houston, Texas. And then they had some left over for the country boys. Mm-hmm. So I think I got one of them country boy scholarships.
Listen, we'll take it. We'll take it. I want to take a little quick pause. You played the horn. Let's talk a little bit about that. Who was your favorite artist? Who were you listening to, and who you were trying to?
Oh man, I was the first. Let me see how I got into it. They had just started a high school band, and I was in the 7th, 8th grade, and had a new guy coming in from Savannah to establish this particular band at the high school. My father was still principal of elementary school. I told him I wanted to play a horn. I just went over there and introduced myself to the guy. I think I was about 12 years old, 11 years old. And I said, I want to play a horn. He said, what do you want to play? I just want to play a horn. And so he introduced me to the trombone. I guess he needed the trombone or something. So I started playing the trombone. He gave me the book and everything. My father bought me the horn. And I said, I don't want to play the trombone. I want to play the trumpet because I just got acquainted with Louis Armstrong and how he played that crispy, loud, brash horn. Mm-hmm. I wanted to play like that. And then so I just played in the band and stuff. And then that's another thing. Spontaneously, what we used to do, Jerome Fabian, who was a piano player by ear, I think he learned to play the piano in his church group or something. But he ended up being a drum major. So what we do is eat lunch early and then run to the band room and we play the local, music that we heard on the radio and stuff. So we formed quite spontaneously a little dance group. We just had the trumpet. We didn't have no electric. We had a microphone and a loudspeaker. That was electric. But we had a trumpet and a baritone horn. I played both of those. And then 2 saxophones. But the piano player was the heart and soul of it because we had no stand-up acoustic bass. He played the bass on his left hand. And we had a vocalist, and we had the motivation. And, you know, we'd heard all these guys playing, and it was the heyday of rhythm and blues. And so we played that music. We just played that funky music, man.
Yeah.
And then after a while, we started getting bookings, and we made $12, $13, $14 on the weekend, you know. And my father saw me getting off into that real deep, and he said, "No, ain't no future in that." So that's why he got me out of it. That's part of the impetus of going to Morehouse too. Getting me away from.
What period was this? What year range?
1950. I first picked up the horn by 1955, 56, right? Okay. Because I went to Morehouse in the fall of '59.
Yeah.
And the sit-in was the spring of 1960. No, it's 59, 60.
So you go to Morehouse. This is 1959. I'm also thinking in a global context, of course.
Oh yeah, the war is start off.
Right, and then also Cuba, you know, right. 1959. So were you aware of any?
Yeah, I was scared to death, man. I was scared to death. I thought these communists were going to come over here. I think that's the last time I prayed, man. I was at Morehouse then because the Cuban Missile Crisis took place, and there's a little chapel. You go into the First Street entrance, there's a little chapel right there. And I was scared. I went into the chapel. I wasn't an atheist yet, not completely. There was a little chapel. And I went in and I kneeled down and I said, I hope these communists don't come over here. I'm being honest as I can, man, understanding what I was thinking about then.
No, and I appreciate that because, you know, some folk will say, oh no, you know, from the start I was like, you know, I mean, because it's you know, it's a process of you know, socialization. It's a process of
it's a complicated process.
Right. And it's very important because it also shows the evolution, particularly in your political, socio-political, you know, intellectual and organizing, you know, experiences as well. No, I do appreciate that, you know, because you know, as someone who's around a lot of people a lot of them are still here. Some of them have passed away, but you know, just hearing that honesty is very important for particularly young folk who are trying to find their way in a world.
Yeah.
You know, the evolution is important. So, and
but then I realized, I mean, the Morehouse education is critical now because it's a well-developed liberal arts education. By the way, I met Malcolm X. I don't know exactly what year that might have been, but he came into the chemistry building and was lecturing, and we got a wind of that thing. And I went over there and heard him, and I thought he was absolutely out of his mind. So I asked him a question. I said, Mr. X, this is my simplistic question. I remember the question. I said, Mr. X, you're talking about violence, aren't you? That's when that seed about the American army. He said the Americans all over the world killing people. Don't you know that they're killing now? You don't even know it. They're killing people in Asia and Africa and all over the world, the whole country. He said violence is as American as apple pie. Now that helped me out a lot because that helped me stop me from going to Vietnam really some years later. So you know, these events happen. You know.
Mm-hmm. This is fascinating and very, very important because, you know, meeting Malcolm, and then of course that seed was planted, as you say, that you did not participate in the imperial, you know, wars that, you know, that goes.
I mean, if it had been a little earlier, I might have gone. I don't know. But the other thing that's kind of important in those years, Martin Luther King was not no darling of the black petty bourgeoisie then. He was a persona non grata. I remember we had a study hall in Sale Annex. And my girlfriend at the time, Lana from Memphis, she was deep into it. Very, very smart young woman. She's passed on now too. And that's one reason I went downtown, because somebody told me Lana was down there. You know, so I couldn't let Lana go by herself, you know. I never did see Lana, but they put Lana in jail. And they had a big rally in Morehouse. The guy was looking at me, how you let them crackers put your girlfriend in jail like that? You know, that's the way the stuff was going on. But Later came that you could drive in front of the cell annex study hall, which was open 24 hours a day, and you'd get away from the dormitory. And so somebody gave me a message, said Lana is outside there. And so I went outside, and she was in the car with Martin Luther King. I didn't know Martin Luther King from Who Shot Sabuga, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So Martin Luther King was trying to recruit, and Lana was helping, trying to recruit some people to get some nonviolent resistance skill, like how you go limp when they put the handcuffs on you and all that kind of stuff. So he was trying to get people to come down to Rush Memorial Baptist Church to get training like that. And I'm going to tell you the truth. I did go down there. I went down there one day, and and I said I just couldn't go again because I wanted to get my degree. Plus, I was swimming. It wasn't a priority with me. And I think Lana saw that as a cop-out part. That's where I was, you know what I mean? But the important thing is that Martin Luther King had to sneak into the campus. He couldn't go through the administration. He had to sneak into the campus and help recruit people like that. Another thing, I remember this to this very day, because President Mays would speak to the chapel, to the assembled student body at 9 o'clock every Tuesday. And that was the day we were scheduled to go downtown. I was a freshman then because all the freshmen sat up in the balcony. And there was this guy, the gay thing comes in too, man. There was this guy named William Carter. He would come in, and he sat right down in front of me because we had these assigned seats. And he would come in, and all the guys that were schooling, the guys would ride.
That's it for Africa World Now Project for this week. I would like to thank you for joining us today and look forward to spending time with you next week. Follow us on Twitter at AFWRLDNWPRJ. Instagram at Africa World Now Project. Access to our other media platforms can be reached through the bios of our social media. I'm your host and producer, James Pope. The Africa World Now Project Collective consists of international media journalist, executive producer, and human rights activist Muiza Muntali, Africa World Now Project media correspondent Funa Ngonda, senior research content contributor and production director Dr. Tasneem Siddiqui, senior research content contributor and production associate Dr. Josh Myers, content contributor and filmmaker Kurt Orderson, technology advisor is Byron Gray of Grayworks Technologies, and creative directors, international creative and artist designer Tabassum Siddiqui and Judah Pope. Africa World Now Project can be heard every Wednesday at 7 p.m. on WSNC, NPR affiliate and broadcast service of Winston-Salem State University. Programs are archived and available on all podcast platforms. Search Africa World Now Project. Until next week, be safe, be peaceful, and above all, be intelligent.
Oh